evening. This is a talk for the BCS Coventry branch about getting into business and consultancy. And the purpose of the talk is to give you some idea of what you might be letting yourself in for if you choose to work this way. My name's Colin Butcher. I've been working as a freelance consulting engineer for the past 25 years. In fact, I shut my company down last year, having decided I would quit working. And this talk is intended to share some of the non-technical experiences that I've had of starting and running an IT consulting business. The hope is it'll help some other people, especially in these uncertain times. Really hope it's useful. Give you a bit of background. Originally, I did mechanical engineering at university. My first career was as a working mechanical engineer in doing things like power stations for the CGB. I was lucky enough to work for somebody who was a very good manager and mentor, and they persuaded me to change into doing computer system engineering on the grounds that I'd found doing the computing side of some of this work pretty straightforward. And I had the advantage of an engineering background, which meant that I would be capable of working on big complex systems, doing things like running power stations. That was, really helpful. I was very fortunate. So I've ended up doing a lot of what I'll call mission critical disaster tolerant systems. So things like air traffic systems, flight control sensors for satellites, banking, finance, healthcare, stuff like that. Most of the systems I've been involved in have been using machines that run an operating system called VMS, which some of you may have come across. And I've been lucky enough to end up going around the world giving talks at big conferences and remaining pretty technical with what I've been doing. So it's been very interesting. So what might help before we get into running a business and starting a business and going off on your own and doing all those scary things is look at what consulting is, because it's really helpful to understand what it is that you're about to go and throw yourself into. So for me, most of it is about problem solving in some shape, form or other. That's what most people in business, I believe, actually end up doing. And outsiders, consultants, usually get asked in when things are complicated and difficult. There aren't enough people are very stressed, there's a really complicated problems. There's a whole variety of reasons why they might choose to bring in some outsiders. And remember, you've been brought in, you've been asked. And you're not going to be given the easy stuff, because that's why they need outside help. So improving our ability to help other people solve problems is, importantly, in a way that works for them, is, I think, at the heart of what consulting is about. And I've always had the view that my goal was not to be invited back to do more of the same, but to be invited back or referred somewhere else to do something else that was equally interesting. And so helping people in a manner that works for them, I think, brings better business. And my experience is that better business is a lot better for you than just more business. So I'd sooner have slightly less work, but of really high interest value and really high responsibility value, than just lots of work. There's an interesting twist there. It's really stressful being really busy. It's even more stressful being not busy enough. So there's a balance to be had with all of these things. So given that consulting is about problem solving, let's take a quick look at what the guts of problem solving is. Now, as we all know, the real problem with the IT industry is it's got very little physical reality, other than going into data centers and looking at machinery. It's largely conceptual. And even if you do get to go and look at the machines and see all the flashing lights and things, you can't deduce very easily from what you see in front of you as to what they're actually doing, what the data flows are, where things are going. And I think that's at the heart of why a lot of people run scared of this stuff. So what falls out of that is the realization that the ability to communicate ideas with other people is desperately important, and collaborating with other people is desperately important. So collaboration and communication are two real key skills that I think you need to have, along with problem solving. Now, here's a thought, or a set of thoughts about problem solving. Primarily, it's about gathering information, not having too many preconceptions. You're trying to reverse engineer what the structure and function of what's going on is. There's always constraints. Yeah, some things are just downright impossible, so you can discard a lot of things. And what you're left with is the different ways in which something could possibly be happening. Then you've got to communicate it and explain it to other people. I've always found it really helpful to have other people to work with. And I've always found the act of explaining stuff and teaching others to be incredibly useful. You know, the act of explaining something to somebody else helps you understand it better yourself. And I think that crucially, if you're working on something really high responsibility, the act of explaining it to somebody else who's with you can help you catch mistakes before you make them. And that's another key feature for me as to the importance of never working alone and having other people with you. Having figured stuff out, you've then got to communicated your ideas and discussed it and come up with a method that works for the organization of choice. Yeah, there's a range of right, there's a range of wrong. Let's try not to do any of the wrongs. With a range of right, well, does it matter which way it's done? Whatever works best for them, not necessarily for you. That's really, again, I think important. You can then go away and help them implement it, help them support it, document your decision making. All of those things are key parts for me of helping somebody else solve a complicated problem. There's a really great book as well that's well worth a read. In fact, there's lots, but this is one of the ones I tend to turn to and tend to give to people. It's called The Mythical Man Month by a guy called Brooks. And in there, he deals very nicely with the the sort of conceptual nature of the business, the importance of communication, how teams work, why a smaller group of highly skilled people will always do a better job than a large group of less skilled people, and so on and so on and so on. If you haven't come across it, I thoroughly commend it. It's well worth a read. So going back to the problem solving, a large amount of it is structuring how you think. So your brain is your primary tool. So try and keep it in as good a shape as you can. So that largely means being somewhat self-aware. Try not to work when you're really tired. Yes, there will be times when you have to, but like, junior doctors and stuff, part of their training is learning to work in less than optimal conditions. The same will happen to you. Working with other people, never working alone, following a consistent process. That's actually quite an important thing as well, because if you're working on something that you haven't seen before, if you go about it the same way as other things that you have seen before, if something weird happens, you know that it's a feature of what's in front of you, not an artifact of the way you've chosen to do it today. So being consistent in following some kind of investigative process is actually really useful, along with recording the decisions you make and why you rejected certain things. Fundamentally, it's about exercising some form of judgment in collaboration with the people you're working with. And usually you've got to make a bunch of assumptions and some decisions to get started at all. And once you've got going, life gets a lot easier. And of course, as an outsider, you've got to do this pretty quickly because they're expecting you to turn up and be the person with the answers, and they're paying you and they'll notice that. So trying to structure your thinking, structure your communication, and help other people is, I think, the key set of skills that you're going to need if you're going to work this way. So some key points: build your knowledge base. It really helps if you've got a deep and wide set of knowledge about the subject areas that you claim to be capable of working in. and have some insights. Really, one of the things I found really useful is teaching others. That helps me understand how things are interrelated better than anything else. I've been very fortunate. I've been able to go to conferences and teach, and it's really interesting teaching people in different countries whose primary language is not English, whose culture is not the same as mine. And that really helps you focus on how you communicate your ideas and get things across to people. It's also really important to know people you can discuss things with, and they can phone you for help, you can phone them for help, and you really trust each other. All the normal barriers are down. You just help each other out. That's what happens, and that's a really great experience when you're working with other people and you need help. 2 or 3 people you could call, you pick up the phone, they might be in a different country, they might be in a different time zone. They'll pick up the phone and they'll help you. You'll have a bit of a chat too, because you haven't spoken to them for ages, but they know you've called them because you need somebody to talk to and you trust them. And you have to do the same for others. And that's, again, hugely helpful to keep things on the straight and narrow. It can be very easy to get very distracted and lost, and knowing who to turn to for help, knowing who to turn to discuss things, and knowing that you don't know all the answers. The reason you're there is that somebody thinks you can help them, not that somebody thinks you know what to do under all circumstances. Your job is to help other people, and your job is, when you've reached the edge of your knowledge, to know who to call for help in order to help move things forward. So, having covered what I think consulting is in a slightly oddball way, probably, let's look at why you might want to do this. So it's worth asking a few hard questions. What's your motivation? Why do you want to do this? Now, clearly, in many cases, it's, you feel you've outgrown where you're working. It might be that the company you were working for has gone pop. It might be that they've downsized considerably. So you've got a whole range of possible reasons why you might be motivated to do this. So try and find the positive ones and stick with those. If you can, see if you can identify what you do, or the way that you do it, that's unique to you. And that's really helpful, because somehow you've got to answer the question, why should anybody hire you to help them? And how do people know that you exist? And it's not always going to work. You might go 18 months with no work. So have you got enough funding to be able to survive that? We had a horrible experience, I don't know, 15, 17 years ago. The company my wife was working for went bang. Everybody got made redundant. She didn't have a job for nearly a year. And the kind of work that I was doing at the time, nothing surfaced for nearly a year. And we'd not that long back moved house. And so we had to get through it, which we did. So we just sort of, cut back, made more effort to go and find things. My wife then got offered 2 or 3 job offers very quickly. I then ended up with the luxury of being able to pick and choose from several possible projects to work on. I chose, in fact, to do a couple in parallel. One of them didn't require much time, but would take a long time over elapsed time. It was only intermittent bits of days here and there. The other was pretty intense for a relatively short period of time. So it all worked out. We were able to manage the situation and keep going. Another question that's worth thinking about is, what is your exit strategy? So starting off on your own is great. Doing things on your own is great. Doing things with other people is great. What happens when you stop? Now, I can freely confess, I hadn't thought about this when I started out 20 odd years ago, until a friend asked me. And I thought, that's a really sensible question, and I don't have a good answer. So having gone through the shutdown experience, if you're a one-person consulting company, I came to the view that largely the business doesn't have a lot of value if I'm not part of it. So most of that, the value in that business is my knowledge and experience. And so without me, it's kind of a meaningless existence. There's a list of contacts, there's a few bits and pieces. So I chose instead to focus on the succession plan. I didn't want to land anybody in the soup for anything I'd been working on. So I poured a lot of time and effort into identifying competent people and helping them and teaching them and passing on my knowledge and experience to them, such that when we came to the end of the project, they were doing most of the work and I was largely, hands off the keyboard, there to help, there to discuss ideas with, but not to be doing the hands-on stuff, but absolutely to be there and definitely to be on the end of the phone as hopefully a voice of calm and reason to help get things working. So I think some of those questions are worthy of some fairly careful consideration. And the other thing is, having listened to all this stuff and talked to other people who run their own businesses, don't feel bad if you decide that it's not for you yet, or it's not for you at all, and you choose to get a different job. And of course, you can always give it a try. And if it does go fut, at least you've tried, at least you have an idea. And it should, with the experiences you've gained, help you in getting another job anyway, I would hope. So there's some brutal realities involved, which I've already touched on. Don't expect to be working all the time and get paid all the time. So the trick is to turn that to your own advantage. Work on stuff you're not very good at, work on stuff you don't like doing. Go and do some pre-sales work, but don't expect it all to pay off, because it won't. And also recognize what's happening to you. So build in time to go for bike rides, go for walks, meet up with friends, all of those things. Because if you don't do that, it's very easy to spiral somewhat down. Having a job is one thing, but being your own business, everything that happens to you emotionally is more extreme. The highs are higher, the lows are lower, and you can swing from one to the other pretty quickly. And that can have knock-on effects on the people around you as well. So you've got to be quite thoughtful about what's going on, and having a really good network of friends and family to support you in your endeavors is really useful. As again, I said, I've been pretty fortunate on that front. The other thing about working this way is that it's personal. You are what your customers think you are, not what you might think you are. That sounds a bit weird, but I think that's true. Does help if you're aware of soft skills a bit more. Don't turn up in a flash car. That's not going to work well. Choose the kind of clothes you wear. Think about what you say and how you say it. Things like that all matter rather more than perhaps you'd like to think they do. But we've all, anybody who's been into a medical appointment, the classic arrogant surgeon is largely a myth, but not entirely. And a lot of people are really very nice and very helpful. But it's also interesting how when people are under a lot of pressure, under stress, the way they will interact and behave does change, and that includes you. So we've got to be quite careful about a lot of these things, and try to keep potential clients, past clients as friends and colleagues. Keep in touch. That's really helpful. I think I've managed to do so. There was one really big project I got involved in at least 15 years ago now. Quite a few of us are still in touch, and that's terrific. That's what you do. It's great. And the last quote comes from a friend, Gerald. It's brutally cynical, but that's what happens, because if somebody thinks you didn't do a great job for them, whatever the reason, that's what they'll tell somebody else, which is not a lot of fun, but that's how it is. And of course, you're also trying to behave like a business. So you're not just a one-person entity, you are a company. So you've got to behave like one, potentially establish collaborative ventures, have a diverse customer base, contribute to different professional communities, all sorts of things. They're all really important as well. Got to understand the psychological contract you've entered into when you're talking to people, and what do they think you're doing as opposed to what do you think you're doing. And somehow you've got to get all of that down into what I'll call the statement of work, with clear boundaries and clear responsibilities. That's really difficult, getting a statement of work straight. Just working on a handshake is great if you really know people and really trust them. But unfortunately, particularly in a regulated world or a world where there's lots of external stuff going on, HMRC, etc., it really helps if you've written these things down. And you might choose that the boundaries are pretty elastic, but you need to know where the elastic snaps, and you need to know what's in and what's out. And often it's more important to write down what's not stuff you're taking on, as opposed to stuff that you are taking on. So you kind of need to cover all of the bases if you can. And you don't have to take the piece of work on. You can always say no. Be nice about it. And you have to build in recovery time for yourself. 25 years ago, I could do something really complicated, difficult, and stressful, give myself a couple of days off and be ready to roll. 20 years later, let's take a couple of weeks off. I could really do with a bit more recovery time. And that will happen to you. So again, think about it. So don't expect to be working all the time and be able to charge people for that all the time, because you can't. It's an impossibility. You also have a lot of obligations that you've got to meet. Quite a lot of the legal things. You'll also be horrified by how much time keeping your computer gear and everything else up to date or rock solid and backed up and all the rest of it takes. And there's all sorts of interesting legal and regulatory things that you've got to comply with, around VAT, HMRC stuff, invoices, contracts, insurance, etc., etc., etc. And I've always found it a good idea to offload what you can. What are you not very interested in? What don't you like doing? You're still responsible for it, but offload what you can, because that frees you up and stops you having too many sleepless nights, basically. So having done all of that, you've got to kind of keep going, understand the field you're in. For me, keeping learning is really important, and the best way I've found of learning is to teach others, because that really helps me, and particularly if you can do practical demonstrations. That's why I built up a fairly sizable lab here of computer gear for the purpose of teaching, prototyping, helping others, and that was really useful. It was a bit of an investment, but it was really worth doing. And try really hard to do a really good job. People trust you. You don't have to be the best, but you do have to be rock solid, competent, practical, the kind of person that people will turn to when they're in trouble, because they trust you to help them get out of it neatly, quietly, professionally, etc. That the trusted advisor thing is key. There's a book by a guy called David Maister, M-A-I-S-T-E-R, called The Trusted Advisor. A little bit on the American side, but there's some really good stuff in that as well. That's worth a read. Then, of course, how do you find time? That comes back to offloading what you don't want to do and building in the recovery time, and knowing where you can go to for help, which is this network of friends and helpers who you can bounce ideas off. So here's the kinds of things you might want to have people who can do when you need it. Talking through legal stuff, talking through accounting stuff, thinking about insurances. It's probably useful to have a financial advisor. It's always useful to have people you can turn to for technology. Yeah, sure, we work in IT. That doesn't mean we're competent in all fields in IT. it's very helpful to know other people who you can bounce ideas off. Trade associations and professional bodies are really useful, like the BCS and this thing called IPSI, used to be the PCG. Sometimes if you're not very good at doing salesy stuff, which I'm not, I've never enjoyed it, it's really helpful to have somebody else working with you who can help you do a lot of that stuff. There's lots of different ways you can do things, but do not try to do everything yourself and be on your own. Yeah, no man is an island, I think is a great quote from somewhere. It's just too much hard work. Technology, it might be really useful, but it is part of your professional appearance. It's got to be there, it's got to be there, it's got to be working, it's all yours. You know, you've got to get on an aeroplane and go. You don't want it to fail when you arrive. Yeah. Worst nightmare for me, you know, I'm ostensibly doing, you know, mission critical disaster tolerant computer systems, and I show up somewhere and the hard drive, you know, my laptop got dropped going through an airport, the hard drive got broken, and I can't work when I arrive. That looks really embarrassing. So I actually was an early adopter of solid state disks. They were horribly expensive at the time, but they were a lot more reliable than conventional hard drives. And carrying a spare and imaging one to the other most evenings in the hotel meant that if anything bad happened, I was back and running pretty quickly. And I stuck with, you know, large brand name stuff. Actually, it was mostly HP portable workstation stuff, for the simple reason that I would, if I was giving talks at conferences, they were usually HP conferences, and it always looked good if you turned up with their kit. And it also meant that I could get replacement pretty easily. In fact, there was one place I literally just, the laptop went bang, pulled the solid state drive out, grabbed a secondhand laptop, which turned up the next day, banged the hard drive in the side, and bar a few little odds and ends, basically booted, ran, and was able to carry on working. I have even been known to take 2 laptops when I'm going somewhere really interesting. But that's possibly a little extreme, but it's really useful. It's really sensible if that's the kind of work you're doing. And you've got to interoperate really carefully. Now, some clients will give you equipment because they're worried about security and a bunch of other stuff. And that's just fine. In fact, it's really helpful. And then you've got to think about data interchange and compatibility. And this is the key one, thinking about security and confidentiality. You know, don't share out people's email addresses. Don't make assumptions. And just be horribly careful around email. It's terribly easy to make mistakes. And it's terribly easy to send the wrong thing in the wrong direction, or word things badly, and it doesn't work in somebody else's culture, and they can't, you know, their use of language is different to yours because English isn't their primary language, and so on and so on and so on. And think hard about encryption and securing data and email. You know, you might want to go as far as using encrypted PDFs, password protected, exchange the passwords in a separate way. You might, you know, might need to do all sorts of things in order to comply. You might want to use digital signatures. Find a method that works and make sure that everybody understands it and that you're not going too far or you're not going far enough on those fronts. Purchasing stuff, it's going to be yours. Don't just buy on price. Yeah, and things have a finite life, so plan for that, budget for it, allow for it. And one of the other things that somebody told me early on, and boy, were they right, treat business money and personal money entirely differently. You know, convert the business money to, you know, how many hours was this going to say? You know, if I spend 500 quid on a piece of kit, is that what, a day, a couple of days work, half a day's work, whatever it is. If that's half a day's work in 3 years, it's probably, you know, why are you wasting time arguing about it? Just get on with it. Personal money is a very different thing. So try to treat them separately if you can. And for me, a lot of it is about minimizing risk and hassle, because travel can really hurt independent professionals, probably far more so than a bigger business, because, you know, you're all of the business, right? And things will go wrong. It won't be convenient. Your laptop will choose to crash in the hour before the taxi is coming to pick you up to go to an airport, and you will have a stressful time. So, pack the suitcase the night before, be as ready as you can, and know how to set stuff up, know how to pack them up, know how to restore them, and stay as current as you reasonably can, because that makes replacing them on the fly somewhat easier. Then, if you really are going places and you want to bring in other people as subcontractors and stuff, do you want to think about expansion and taking on more work and farming things out to subcontractors and working on more than one thing at the same time? It's a really attractive idea. It's a massive scaling up, and it's, I think, quite hard. I have worked with people on big projects where they've been subcontracting through my company, and it's a whole extra level of complexity and responsibility. It's worked really well. We're all still friends. In fact, in many cases, great friends. It's really good. I would really recommend it if you want to try and do it. But you've got to know the people, you've got to trust the people, you've got to be able to explain it to clients, and you do have to be prepared to fund it. You might want to go and make a speculative visit somewhere. So somebody's got to put their hand in their pocket for the airfares and the hotel bills, and that's you. That's not your subcontractors. And the other thing is, are you the best person to lead whatever it is? It might be that actually, somebody else's specialist knowledge is more valuable than yours. So you might front it through your company, but one of the subcontractors is actually taking the lead. So that's great. It works really, really well. If you've got really good people around you and you're around them. This is not a leader and followers. This is a meeting of equals, and you are obliged to listen to the others, and in many cases, let them take the lead. And that's just great. It's really, really nice working with people of that level of ability. Really good fun. And then you've got all these other bits and pieces, and somebody somewhere will ask you for your policy on all sorts of things. Then you've got all the fun and games around the ways that insurance covers work, and so on and so on and so on. So don't underestimate the administrative workload of taking on bigger projects that are greater than you can do on your own, because you do need to be a lot more organized and structured. It's probably really a detailed subject for another talk, but it's worth mentioning it, because if you've got ideas of going in that direction, it's worth just thinking it through before, rather than just going for it and then realizing that it was slightly more awkward than you thought. But hey, give it a shot, give it a try, go for it. It could be a load of fun. And then hiding behind all of that is this reputation, ethics, and value stuff. That's really important again. You've got to live with the consequences when they make decisions on your behalf. You can't shoot them down afterwards. That's wrong. So you've got to be really careful about who you collaborate with, and make sure that everybody has similar ethics and values, and you genuinely trust each other. So that's great. It works. It's very good. And it can be a lot of fun and very successful for all of you. So again, you've got to do this leadership stuff. And the last point, I think, is the one that matters here. It's all yours, whether it goes well or badly. But you've got to share out the credit when it goes well. You've got to thank people. You've got to be nice to them, help them, do stuff. It's good. You've also got to keep the pipeline full. So it's really easy to be really, really busy and then take your eye off finding more work. And then suddenly you get to the end of the project, and that was terrific. And now everybody is sort of several months waiting for the next, or trying to find the next thing to do. So that's where potentially having somebody doing the looking and chasing stuff down, he becomes another key part of running a business. And you got to fund it. So cash flow might be of interest to you. And what kind of work is appropriate, and what kind of customers do you want? This is where it gets really, really interesting and quite difficult. Now, this is something I came up with ages ago. I hope it works, and it works for me. So I have this sort of mental assessment thing going on when somebody gets in touch wanting help. So I call it a 3x2 matrix on the grounds that there are 3 columns and 2 rows. So let's try to deal with some of this fairly easily. So the 2 rows are, let's get the lower row out of the way. This is, the phone call goes, oh, yeah, we got this problem. How much? How quickly? Yeah, well, what's really going on? No. How much? If you can't get them out of that, that's not going to be great work. I don't think, because they're really only interested in cost. They're not interested in understanding what the problem is. They're not really as interested as you'd like them to be in understanding how to get a good result. The upper row is much more fun, which is, what's involved. Okay, so what's going on? What might we have to do? Got any feel for how long it might take? Got any feel for how long it might end up costing? That's a much better kind of a conversation to be having. And if you can move people from one to the other, then that's great. If you can't, well, that might be the kind of work you choose not to take on. And usually there are 3 reasons for people getting in touch. Let's deal with the first column, which is the in crisis. Yeah, something bad has happened. They need help right the hell now. So it's either a horrid surprise or, or worse. And bottom left-hand corner is the kind of work that I think is worth avoiding. Everything's gone horribly wrong. They need help right now. They're only interested in how quickly and cheaply it can be done, and their mind isn't open to any kind of discussion. I don't think you'll ever satisfy what they want, and that's what they're going to tell other people. So if you can't get them out of that very stressed, cost-driven way of looking at things, that's a great time to probably not get involved. But try really hard to open their minds to other possibilities, and you might be surprised how well that works. I have been on a number of occasions. It can be really good. Still with the second column, this is typical. People have given something a go, they've got into it, they found it's a bit more tricky than they really expected, and they could, it would be really handy to talk to somebody else. We don't need it today, but some in the next few weeks would be really handy if we could do that, please. That'd be good. So that's pretty much what normally happens, and that's usually that's where the bulk of your work is probably going to come in the top center. The fun stuff, however, is the top right. So this is where you've got people who are planning a long way ahead. They understand the value of getting other people involved, and that's hugely satisfying long-term relationship stuff. So that for me is the fun part. And there are a number of people I've been fortunate enough to work with and be asked back to go and work with them again. And it's all been in that top right-hand corner. These are people who value you being there. They don't need you all the time, and that's great. But when they do need you there, then you make the effort to be there. And they're planning ahead, you're planning ahead, and you can get some really fun stuff done. And that's really interesting and very satisfying. And that is, for me, the ideal kind of work. So that might help you categorize things. It's a way of looking at it. It's worked for me. It might, I hope, work for some of you. But it all comes back to being clear. You've got these initial discussions, proposals, negotiations, statements of work. test for me is whether people will collaborate on writing the statement of work and getting the terms and conditions. If the people who need the help fend this off to another department of procurement and stuff, that's never a good sign in my book. I would much prefer that people are prepared to collaborate on helping create this and understand it themselves. And that tends to be a bit of a filter I use as to whether I want to get involved in something. But it's really good. Having said that, yes, yeah. Do I still get involved in things? I do occasionally. I'll come to that in a minute. Having shut my company down, I've now decided that most of my stuff has gone off to charities. If I do get involved in helping and mentoring, it's no longer my responsibility. I'm no longer taking responsibility for running projects, but I will, and I don't particularly need to be paid myself, but I would like people to make an adequate donation to a charity of my choosing. And there are plenty of good charities out there, things like Minimise Sans Frontières and a number of others are well worthy, in my view, of support for the work they do. And so if somebody can benefit from my passing on some knowledge experience, that's a great thing. If you can do things on a fixed price project base rather than hourly rate, I think that's a better way of working for a whole collection of reasons, not just taxation, an HMRC and IR35, but it's easier to manage, it's easier to control. Both sides know that it's fixed term. There's defined things that get involved. You can limit the risk for both sides. So you can proceed in defined stages, and both sides have got to be committed. And if that works out, then that can be great. Got to understand what it is that you're doing and that you're not doing. Make sure you identify the criteria in the statement of work and the payment milestones along the way. So, you get paid on time. That's great, because that really helps with, particularly if there's a lot of travel and expense involved. Or if you're supplying equipment potentially, or odds and ends of equipment. You also have to, if you have people working with you as subcontractors, you have to pay them on time. You don't need lots of customers. You just need good customers. And you don't need, I think, too many of them in order to have a adequately satisfying business that works for you. I also think you've got this, which is your duty of care. And your duty of care is kind of the core ethics and values of why you're doing stuff and how you're helping other people. Oh yeah, there's the reference to the trusted advisor down the bottom. I mentioned that earlier. So it's teaching as you go. It's passing on knowledge and experience. Have people do things their way, not yours. You shouldn't become a single point of failure. And if you fell under the metaphorical bus tomorrow, would everything continue? And it should do. And so your duty of care is sharing as much knowledge and information as you can along the way in order to help the end result come good. So that's the duty of care thing, I think, is a really good way of looking at it. And I would encourage you to think hard about that if you are going to go off and give it a go on your own. So that brings me to the end of the talk. So if you do decide to have a go, that would be fantastic. Enjoy it, have some fun along the way. I really hope it's successful. I really hope you found it useful. And if you feel the urge to get in touch and ask the odd question, that's just fine by me. So thank you all very much, and best of luck. Cheers.